modern monetary theory, MMT, first of all, it's well over 100 years old, maybe 140 years old.
Okay.
So there's nothing particularly modern about it. It goes by another name, Chartalism, but it's the same thing. Money is what the state says it is. If the state says it's money, it's money. I think, okay, interesting. How do you actually enforce that? How do you back that up? And the way you back it up is taxation. So if we all make money, gains, payments, income, whatever, and the state says you got to pay tax on it. Mm-hmm. And by the way, we will only accept our definition of money in the form of taxes. So if you don't go along with our definition of money, you can't pay your taxes. And if you can't pay your taxes, you end up in jail. But the idea is that money is what the state says it is, because the state says that's the only thing we take in the form of taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, we'll put you in jail. Now, and that's where Chartalism comes from, because the King's Charter or the Queen's Charter or whatever. So if that's your starting place, then there's no comparison between a national budget and an individual budget. If you and I don't pay our bills, someone's going to repossess the car or mm-hmm. take the keys to the house or whatever. So we got to balance our budgets over some time frame. But if the government doesn't pay its bills, so what? Just print some more money, and or raise money in the form of bonds. And then you say, well, what if they don't want to buy the bonds? If the market doesn't want to buy the bonds and the interest rates are up? Well, that's what central banks are for. The central bank will buy the bonds, keep the rates low. Oh, yeah, but who's going to pay the central bank? Well, we'll just issue more. Now, I realize some of this sounds laughable, but I'm telling you verbatim, this is what modern monetary theory is. So there's no limit on how much you can spend, no limit on the size of your deficit. Danielle referred to the debt to GDP ratio. I agree, that's a very important economic indicator, but the modern monetary theorists will say, no, it's not. Who cares? U.S. debt to GDP ratio is about 130%, but it's growing quickly. And if you look at global statistics and say, well, who's at that lunch table? Like, who else is around 130%? The answer is Lebanon, Greece, mm-hmm. Italy. These are your classmates. But then everyone points to Japan, where the ratio in Japan is about 280%. They say, see, Japan, you go to the Ginza, the lights are still on. Yeah. So we could go to 280% or whatever, no problem. I think Japan's a special case for a number of reasons, and I wouldn't want to be Japan. They're in a curious position where the population is declining. So their per capita numbers are actually better than their gross numbers. And Saki Kabar-san, famous Mr. Yan of the 1980s, he explained this to me personally. I had lunch with him in Korea. And of course he's right mathematically. I said, but the reductio ad absurdum is Japan ends up with one person who owns the whole country, and she's very rich. But that's kind of how the Japanese are thinking about it. Right. So I don't know if we want to go there. But just to take it a step further, and a lot of this comes from Stephanie Kelton, and I met Stephanie, very nice person, but she's this way off on off the reservation, so to speak, in terms of these theories. But she's done a good job of articulating them. So, for example, she says, and this is from her book, so this is not I'm not imposing this on her. She says that the government bond market is a favor to investors. We're doing you a favor by giving you something you can invest in. We don't actually need a government bond market because we could just give the Fed wire instructions to Lockheed. And if we want to buy a new, fighter aircraft or Raytheon or whoever is providing services to the government or the Social Security Administration for that matter, the Fed could just wire the money directly to these government vendors. Who needs a bond market? It's kind of an inefficient pain in the neck. But we do it anyway because you guys need a place to park your money. I mean, this is what they say. Wow. And so, but just to kind of step back a little bit, big picture, what they're doing, and this can be done in practice. See, the problem with refuting modern monetary theory is you get very far down the road saying, yeah, that's actually true, that's actually true, that's actually true. At the end, it all falls down. But they go very far down a path because the truth is you could give the Fed wire instructions and they could send money to Lockheed. You could issue twice as much debt. I mean, there's a debt ceiling, but Congress routinely raises it. But what she's done and what the other theorists have done, they've taken the Treasury, which is a cabinet level executive branch office, and the Fed, which is an independent, privately owned. The president picks the governors, but technically privately owned, independent agency, and she's merged them. She's merged the balance sheet of the Treasury and the Fed. Said whatever the Treasury wants to spend, the Fed is there to finance it. Mm-hmm. The Fed can buy the bonds, and we can skip the bonds completely and just give the Fed wire instructions and send the money out. Now this is what they say. This is not me. So And then you say, well, okay, I don't see what's wrong with that. I mean, it sounds, legally, I'm a lawyer also, this is all true. It can be done in practice. I guess that's my point, regardless of the legalities. So where does it all fall down? A couple things. Number one, the theorists completely ignore the role of commercial banks. They're so focused on the Fed and the Treasury. Real money, the money that counts, is created by commercial banks, not by the Fed. Pardon me, the Fed, when they create base money, that's available to banks as reserves, but there's no shortage of reserves right now. They're paying interest on excess reserves.
Right.
Most of the Fed's balance sheet is not cash, it's excess reserves. So there's no constraint on banks' ability to lend or borrowers' ability to borrow money and spend. That can be constrained by reserves in theory, but it's not, because they have trillions in excess reserves.
Okay.
So that's not even an issue. But but the money's created at the banks. If people don't want to borrow and banks don't want to lend, then the M2 and M1 and M2 don't expand. And then velocity, which is the turnover of money, is collapsing. It's up a little bit recently, but that's after a Red Bull cliff dive in 2020. And that's, I always say, if you have $24 trillion and times zero is zero.
Right.
Meaning if that's your money supply and your velocity is zero, you don't have an economy. So velocity is psychological. The Fed can't control it. There are all kinds of behavioral aspects. The real money that kind of creates economic activity doesn't come from the Fed, it comes from the commercial banks. They ignore the commercial banks, and then on top of everything else, they ignore foreign exchange channels. You can destroy the dollar. Like, everything inside the United States can kind of look okay, but if the dollar is like, it's worth, €5 or sorry, $5 to the euro, so it's worth 20% of what it is now, every other currency strengthens against the dollar, or gold goes to $4,000 an ounce almost overnight. What you've done, you've devalued the dollar 80-90%, which is what we did in the 70s. Measured in gold, you go from $35 an ounce to $800 an ounce. That's a 90% devaluation of the dollar, measured in gold. And we actually had a 50% devaluation of the dollar between 77 and 81, measured by CPI. So this has happened before, not that long ago. So they're on a path to destroy the dollar. They're on a path to destroy the international monetary system. Here we are in Bretton Woods, where it all began, but governments may be back here trying to fix things sooner than later. So now, I doubt there are 5 members of Congress who could give you a tenth of what I just said about modern monetary theory. Right. But they're doing it. Whether they know it or not, whether they understand it, can define it or not, it doesn't matter. They're doing it. These multi-trillion-dollar, year-after-year deficits, debt to GDP going past 130%, unlimited bond issuance, monetization by the Fed or the commercial banks, they're playing it out. So this will end in something a lot worse than a recession.